CBS The Young and the Restless Spoilers. Kyle Avit's proposal to Claire Newman was meant to be the gesture that erased doubt, the sweeping romantic solution that would silence the lingering questions about his loyalty. Yet beneath the glitter of the ring and the practiced words of devotion, the foundation of their relationship trembled with unresolved fractures. Claire had been trying to stitch together her trust in him ever since the truth about Nice about Audra Charles and that stolen kiss had come to light. Her willingness to rebuild did not come from naivety, but from a deep desire to create something meaningful out of the chaos of her past. But no matter how much she wanted to forgive, the scars of betrayal were not easily smoothed over. When Kyle dropped to one knee, heart in his throat and desperation disguised as romance, Claire's hesitation said more than words ever could. She was not ready. The weight of rejection, even if softened by her careful phrasing, struck Kyle like a blow. Claire did not say no with cruelty. She said it with a quiet ache, framing it as not now. But for Kyle, the distinction mattered little. To a man so accustomed to getting what he wanted, so desperate to prove himself after a disastrous lie, anything short of an enthusiastic yes was a wound to his pride and his heart. Shock turned to humiliation, and humiliation curdled into a reckless energy that begged for release. Just as his decision to propose had been an impulsive reaction to guilt, his response to Claire's rejection threatened to be another rash mistake. The danger of Kyle's impulsiveness was that it rarely came from calculation. It erupted like lightning, brilliant and destructive, leaving him to deal with the smoldering aftermath. He could have walked away, given Claire the space she so clearly needed, and proven his maturity through patience. Instead, the sting of her hesitation gnawed at him, whispering that he was losing her, that every moment she spent thinking was a moment she drifted further out of his grasp. That whisper followed him through the corridors of the Abbott home, echoing in his father's words of caution, in the sharp criticisms from Summer and even from Jack, who urged him to slow down. But Kyle's heart was not guided by reason. It was driven by wounded pride and the need for validation. In Genoa City, validation often came in the most dangerous places. It was not impossible to imagine that after Claire's rejection, Kyle would find himself at the GCAC, nursing his bruised ego with a drink. Bars had always been sanctuaries for the brokenhearted in this town, places where sorrow and temptation collided under dim lights and whispered music. There, he could sit in silence, lost in thought, until an all-too-familiar voice pulled him back into the world. Audra Charles, equally wounded and equally adrift after the implosion of her relationship with Nate Hastings, might very well cross his path. For Audra, rejection had become a scar she could not conceal. Nate's anger at her confession, his final decision to walk away despite his promises of protection, had stripped her of stability. She had gambled that the truth might save them, but instead it condemned her. Now, she wandered Genoa City like a figure out of place, bruised by loss yet still sharp enough to turn her pain into armor. If fate or perhaps the cruel hand of soap opera destiny brought her into Kyle's orbit that night, it would not be as predator and prey, but as two souls licking their wounds, seeking solace in the wrong arms at the wrong time. The potential collision between Kyle and Audra was a disaster waiting to happen. Both had history, both carried the burden of recent heartbreak, and both were prone to justifying bad decisions as fleeting comfort. For Kyle, Audra represented danger wrapped in allure, the woman whose kiss had nearly destroyed his relationship, but whose candor had ironically left her looking more honest than him in Claire's eyes. For Audra, Kyle was the one man who had resisted her in the past, the man who had chosen Claire over her despite the sparks. In a moment of weakness, could that rejection turn into curiosity, into a test of what might have been? The possibility hung like a storm cloud, dark and tempting. Claire, meanwhile, would be left to navigate the aftermath of her own decision. Saying not now was meant to protect their fragile bond, to give herself space to rebuild trust. But in Genoa City, hesitation often became the wedge that split couples apart. Gossip would swirl. Nikki and Victor would weigh in. Jack would lecture. Billy might even seize the opportunity to remind Claire that Abbott men were notorious for impulsiveness, planting seeds of doubt in her mind. And through it all, Claire would wrestle with guilt. Had she been too harsh? Had she pushed Kyle into someone else's arms by holding back her yes? Or had she saved herself from a lifetime of repeating cycles of betrayal? The true tragedy of this unfolding arc was not in the rejection itself, but in the choices it set into motion. Kyle's refusal to sit with discomfort, his need to act rather than reflect, made him vulnerable to the very pitfalls he swore he had learned to avoid. Claire's attempt at honesty and caution, while noble, left her partner spiraling into recklessness. And Audra, the woman caught between manipulation and vulnerability, stood at the crossroads of destruction and redemption, her next move capable of reshaping not only her fate, but theirs as well. What loomed ahead was a triangle not defined by passion, but by pain. Kyle's impulsiveness threatened to undo the fragile progress he had made with Claire. Audra's loneliness threatened to pull her back into destructive patterns. And Claire's caution, meant to preserve her relationship, might instead shatter it. The inevitable confrontation, whether it came in whispers of gossip, in the reveal of a night gone too far, or in the bitter acknowledgement that trust once broken rarely heals, will test the very fabric of their lives. In Genoa City, mistakes rarely stayed buried, and rejection rarely passed without consequence. Kyle's ring may have remained in its box, but the choices he made after that moment would define whether it ever saw the light of day again, or whether it would become yet another relic of a love story that collapsed under the weight of lies, pride, and impulsive hearts searching for solace in the wrong places. The corridors of the Genoa City Athletic Club had seen countless confrontations over the years, but few as unexpected as the quiet, accidental meeting between Nikki Newman and Diane Jenkins Abbott. Their history was layered with animosity, mistrust, and the constant tug-of-war between Newman and Abbott alliances. Yet on this particular afternoon, fate placed them in the same space not as adversaries, but as to women whose children's futures were entangled in ways neither could ignore. Nikki, polished as ever, carried herself with the commanding presence of a woman who had spent decades navigating Victor's empire, while Diane exuded a mix of poise and vulnerability that came from living in the shadow of her mistakes and the hard-earned redemption she now fought to protect. The initial exchange was polite, cautious, as if both were measuring the temperature of the air. Nikki, long accustomed to confrontations, braced for the familiar sparks of disdain, while Diane, always prepared to defend her place in the Abbott family, misread the moment and assume Nikki had come to voice disapproval of Kyle. For a fleeting second, the old bitterness reservacidian's instinct to see in Nikki a rival, a threat, someone ready to dismantle her son's already fragile standing. But Nikki surprised her. Instead of barbed words, Nikki spoke with an unexpected calm, shifting the conversation away from rivalry and into the delicate territory of guidance. Nikki admitted that she had spoken with Claire and urged patience rather than haste, advising her granddaughter to take her time, but also to allow forgiveness a chance to take root. In Nikki's view, mystics, no matter how painful, were part of the human condition, and while betrayal could scar, forgiveness could heal if nurtured carefully. It was not a defense of Kyle's actions, but rather a recognition that relationships in Genoa City rarely thrived without weathering storms. This perspective caught Diane off guard. For so long, she had viewed Nikki as an immovable obstacle, a Newman matriarch who would forever guard her family against Abbott influence. Yet here Nikki was not condemning Kyle, but offering a bridge of understanding. Diane's gratitude was palpable. She shared, with a hint of relief, that she and Jack had already urged their son to be patient, to resist the impulse to fix everything with grand gestures. Kyle's instinct to propose had been born of guilt and desperation, and while Diane longed for her son's happiness, she feared that forcing the issue would only deepen the divide with Claire. To hear Nikki echo this sentiment was more than surprising, it was a revelation. For once, their maternal instincts aligned, transcending the years of rivalry and suspicion that had often placed them on opposite sides of Genoa City's most bitter conflicts. As the conversation deepened, Diane found herself confiding something she had held close: Kyle's plan to propose to Claire. She admitted that she worried the timing was wrong, that Kyle's heart was in the right place, but his judgment clouded by fear of losing Claire forever. Nikki listened carefully, her sharp intuition piecing together the implications. Rather than react with anger or dismissal, she nodded, understanding that the impulse, while misguided, came from love. Together, they agreed that what Kyle and Claire needed most was not interference, but the space to rebuild trust without added pressure. This rare moment of solidarity between the two women was underscored by a shared commitment to protect the younger generation from further entanglement with Audra Charles. Both recognized the damage that had already been done. The way Audra's kiss with Kyle had fractured Claire's faith and set into motion a chain of doubt. If Kyle and Claire were to have any chance of moving forward, the shadow of Audra had to be removed from their path. For Nikki and Diane, agreeing on this was almost startling. It was as though, for a brief instant, their long-standing rivalry dissolved in the face of a greater priority, ensuring that the sins of manipulation and betrayal did not define the futures of their children and grandchildren. By the end of their encounter, what began as a wary exchange evolved into a fragile truce. The bitterness of the past was not forgotten, but it was momentarily set aside, replaced with an understanding that sometimes adversaries could find common ground when the well-being of their families was at stake. Nikki left the meeting with a renewed sense of purpose, determined to guide Claire towards strength rather than suspicion. Diane walked away reassured, grateful for the unexpected support, knowing that even if Nikki would never be her friend, she had, in that moment, been an ally. In Genoa City, where alliances shifted like the wind and trust was a currency more fragile than gold, this rare moment of unity between Nikki Newman and Diane Jenkins Abbott was a reminder that even the deepest rivalries could bend under the weight of love for family. Whether the truce would hold was uncertain, but for now, both women shared a singular hope that Kyle and Claire could rise above the mistakes of the past, find their way back to each other, and leave the chaos of Audra behind.